Good morning, all you Psychology 100 and one-on-one students. Today, or this week, we are going to be talking a little bit about personality theories. And what I want to focus on today is one of the more difficult ones to understand, which is my guy, Sigmund Freud's ideas of the psyche. When he talks about the word psyche, he's talking about personality, all right? So what is it? How does it get there? Where is it coming from? Too bad we're not in class, because I have a lot of cool props. Unfortunately, I don't have them with me. And we would have played a really cool game, so we're just going to have to imagine that we're in class, and we'll talk a little teeny bit about how that's all going to roll. But psychoanalysis was one of the major first ideas of psychology. Today, a lot of the ideas have kind of fallen out of favor, mainly because of the fact that these are really, really difficult, if not impossible, to prove, to get scientific evidence for them. All right, that doesn't mean, though, that they're not interesting, that they're not something to think about, that there's not even something there. And even if you disagree with these ideas, the idea that some of the other theories we've talked about, like behaviorism, and we're going to talk a little bit about humanism this week, those ideas have come out from people not agreeing with psychoanalysis. So it's really important to kind of understand what Freud was going for with this psychoanalytic idea, and to do it with an open mind, thinking about how maybe some of it might make some sense. It's also a concept that's kind of hard to understand sometimes, because the whole key to psychoanalysis is the word unconscious, the unconscious, a part of our personality, a part of our psyche that's down under the surface, that's very, very hard to rationally understand because it is unconscious. So, for example, it means that things we do, or we talked about motives, are things under the surface that we're not consciously aware of why we're doing what we're doing. And so it's a harder thing to really understand and get our heads around what it means. And so that's why I think one of the things that I've done in class, and again, we can't really do this really cool game, is to do kind of a psychoanalytic example, but we can do it kind of hypothetically. The psychoanalytics, like Freud, believed that there's a reason behind everything, and most of what we do is for unconscious reasons, and things are symbolic. So think about back in your past. Think about when you were a kid and you went trick-or-treating. All right, when you did that, you think about whatever pops into your mind first. Why does that pop into your mind? The psychoanalytics, like Freud would say, that means something, and these are symbolic. You know, if you think about our personality and you think about who we often are putting on a persona. We act a certain way because we're in public and we want people to think of us a certain way. Our true self, though, might be underneath there. Might be something that's a little bit harder to get at. Well, it's like, if you think about Halloween, it's a perfect time to be something else. Why does that one from your childhood, why does that pop out? So maybe there's under the surface unconscious reasons for it, and things are symbolic. Another way of looking at it is if you think about what you would be today, if you were going to go to a dress-up party today, even though we can't do it because we're supposed to be social distancing, but let's say you did. What would you be if you could be anything? Okay. And then we start to analyze that. Why is that what you came up with? And when we do it in a class and you hear a lot of people's, think about what those ideas might be. You hear, for example, a lot of superhero answers. People dressed as Power Rangers or Ninja Turtles or Spider-Man, Batman, right? Why? Why, as a society, do we have a lot of interest in that? Is it possible that there's an unconscious need to be powerful, to have that superhero? Another psychoanalytic psychologist that is mentioned in your book, and we don't have a lot of time to talk about him, but Carl Jung, who believed, for example, in something called the Superman. We have a part of ourselves that really wants to have that power, and that's why it comes out in these superhero costumes. Another theme that you hear about a lot when we do it are scary themes. All right, people want to dress as things that are violent or aggressive. All right, why? Well, Freud would say because in real life, that's something we don't openly express. Freud focused on things in the id. We're going to talk about the id in a few minutes, but unconsciously, we have two main drives that really get at us and bother us, because there's two drives that we have in our life, two motives that we learn from a very, very early age that we need to repress. And those are aggression and sex. And so those are the ones that he focused on, that they come out symbolically in things. So our interest in things that are violent and aggressive, and people wanting to dress in these scary and bloody, gory outfits, is a way of expressing that aggressive impulse we all have, which we've been taught early on we can't express. The other one, of course, is sex. So Freud talked about what he called phallic symbols. Phallic symbols are things that could in any way be a penis, is a penis. All right, so for example, I had a student one time said as a kid she went trick-or-treating as a red Crayola crayon. To Freud, that's a penis. All right, so maybe that's representing some of the sexual feelings that she can't express normally. I think of what I would dress at. Here's a perfect example. I could pick up myself. Gene Simmons. Gene Simmons from Kiss. If I could go trick-or-treating today, I think dressing like Gene would be just the awesomest costume ever. All right? Well, this is sex and aggression. I mean, he's got the tongue, that's a sex thing. He's got the demon costume, that's a violent thing. So maybe it's a way of me showing those parts that we all have, but we taught early on, you can't do that. All right, so when we talk about psychoanalysis, that's why that word analysis is in there. The idea is that everything we do has some meaning behind it. There's no such thing as a coincidence. All right, when people say, oh, I just dressed like that because I thought it was cute, but why did you think it was cute? There's a reason. Right? So let's explain a little bit about how Freud saw parts of the psyche, and this kind of goes along with his stages. And we talked about those first stages of development: oral, anal, and phallic. This is how they develop, and as we go through those stages, our parts of our personalities start to come out. I'm going to illustrate them with some pictures. Hopefully they'll flip when you see them. But keep in mind that I like to think of it when I visualize these parts. It's almost like an old 60s sitcom like Gilligan's Island, where Gilligan had to make a decision, and he's got his little angel on one side and his little devilly part on the other, and they're both arguing with him about what to do. Freud's three parts of the psyche are kind of like that. The difference, though, is that in this case, the devilly part is really not bad. It's just selfish, and it is completely unconscious. All right, so this is the part of our personality that Freud believed we are born with. This is id, okay? The id. ID is not ID, it's id. All right, the id operates under what is called the pleasure principle. All right, the id is completely selfish. We talked about egocentrism. All right, so we are born, babies are completely id. Babies cry for only selfish reasons. They're not crying because they're worried about the virus, or they're worried about who's president, or they're worried about the economy. They're crying because of their own needs, selfish needs. That includes everything from comfort and safety and food to things like sex and aggression. All right, those are unconscious, selfish desires, motives. They are there under the surface. They're there all the time. All right, but as other parts of our psyche develop, those sometimes become repressed, or at least controlled. They operate again under pleasure principle. The whole guiding motive is to get pleasure for the self. During the anal stage, so as oral stage, anal stage, the development of consciousness and the feeling of self comes out. Babies and toddlers at this age, 1 to 2 years old, are starting to realize that they are independent. Remember, autonomy. All right, this is the development of the second part, the ego. Oh, wrong picture, sorry. Ego. All right, the ego operates under the reality principle. All right, the ego is the rational part of you. This is the main part of you that you think of as yourself when you think of yourself, and the part of you that's thinking and making decisions and doing things deliberately. All right, the ego, though, has to operate under reality. This is the age where children start to understand that just because they want something doesn't mean that it's going to happen. A 2-year-old may still want something, but if they know, okay, just because I want to eat right now doesn't mean I'm going to get it. Reality starts. And this is that part of you that you think of, again, as the self with a capital S. All right, during the phallic stage, superego. All right. Superego is more or less the conscience, or what he calls the ego ideal, the angel part. This is the part that society puts into you, your parents, your teachers, whoever, that's telling you right from wrong. What do we need to do to be the good little boy, the good little girl? What is right? What is wrong? All right, so that's the little angel telling you what you should do. All right, so by the age of around 6, at the end of that phallic stage, the Oedipal complex we talked about, your personality is set, according to Freud. At this point, you have your id, ego, superego, all there. But for the rest of your life, they're constantly at battle. Many, many, many times in our life, what we are driven to do, what our id wants, what would be selfishly pleasurable for ourselves, is something our superego is telling you can't do. And again, especially things like sex and aggression. All right. So the ego's job is to figure out what to do. How do I balance these two? All right, because this turmoil among these three is the root of what Freud would call anxiety. This is what he means by that word. It's this interplay and this battle between what I really want from me, what would feel good, versus what society and I'm allowed to do. So how do I balance them? How do I do that? And the ego often tries to balance them by using a technique called defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are the one thing of Freud's that I think makes some sense, and that when we talk about them here really quickly, I think you're going to understand and see there's something here that you can relate to. All right, so let's just kind of talk through some of these defense mechanisms and what he means by them. All right, so we can use some real life examples. All right, so let's say, for example, you're on a diet. All right, so you're being a really, really good boy or girl. You're doing what you're supposed to do. You've maybe lost weight. You've been eating healthy for a week. Or a couple weeks. You go out to eat and you eat your salad and you have a glass of water or iced tea, something low-cal, and you're doing a really good job. And then there's a dessert that's sitting in that dessert case and it's just calling to you. All right. What does your id want you to do? Your id is going to be motivating you to eat that dessert. Right? Let's say you give in to it. You do. And then a friend sees you and says, "What the heck are you doing? You just blew your diet. You just ate that huge piece of chocolate chip cheesecake, and what did you do?" What do you say? Things like, "Oh, well, I deserve it. I've gone several weeks without eating. This isn't really that much. I'm going to run it off tomorrow, or I won't eat for the next 3 days, or it's just a break." Those are what? Rationalizations. This is your ego's way of trying to justify what you just did. You did something you know you shouldn't have done, but you had a good reason for it, and you're trying to justify it to yourself as well as anyone else who's going to listen. This is rationalization. Okay. Another defense mechanism is denial. Out and out denying. Let's say you meet a person, let's say at a party or somewhere, and you really, really like them. They're really, really hot. What does your id want? Your id is just going to be pushing you to just dump them, okay? No social constraints. But you don't do that because that's not nice. And you might get rejected. That person might hit you or tell you no, which is threatening to your ego. So what do? You say, "I don't really think they're attractive." Denial. Or something called projection. "I don't really think that they're hot, but my friend does." All right, "I really am not angry at my professor, my classmates are." Projection. You have a feeling, you have some kind of a motive or desire that is just too threatening to your ego to admit that you have it, so you think everyone else feels that way. Projection. Repression. That's a defense mechanism we've already talked about when we talked about memory. You go through something traumatic and it's just too anxiety producing, you repress it. We repress sexual urges. We repress things like aggressive urges. We just push them under the surface and act like they're not there. Regression. Sometimes under stress, we act like we go back to an earlier stage of development. If you think about a little child, for example, a 3-4-year-old, new sibling is born. What does that id want? That id is threatened by that new kid because that kid's going to take my attention away. All right, but I'm being told that's not nice. Not nice to throw my brother, out the window like Ike in South Park. So what do? I regress. I start acting like a baby. I want to breastfeed. I talk baby talk. I start wetting myself. Regression. Another very commonly used defense mechanism Let's say you're mad at your boss. Your boss comes in and yells at you at your job and really just reams you out for something that you don't feel that's justified. So you're really, really angry at your boss. All right. Your id is going to be unconsciously pushing you to just smack him or you used to yell at him. But you don't do those things because not only do you not want to lose your job, but you want to be a good little boy or girl. You don't want to get in trouble. You don't want to be looked at as the nasty person who beat up the boss. So you push it under, you hold it in, and then you go home and do what? You take it out somewhere else. You yell at your partner, or you kick your dog across the room, or you, whatever. Not that you should, but people take it out in another way. That's displacement. All right, you're really, really angry at your boss. You can't express it directly, so you take it out somewhere else. Displacement, though, is taking it out in a pretty negative way. I would say kicking your dog is not a good thing to do. All right, so it's a negative way, but it's on the wrong target. All right. Another one, this one's a little trickier to understand, something called reaction formation. Okay, let's say, and this is a typical example of how this may, all right, the psychoanalytics would believe that anytime anyone has a major reaction to something, there's a reason for that. All right, now sometimes the reaction is obvious. All right, let's say, for example, you have a family member who, died of a certain disease, and then you become someone who goes out and you do a lot to try to get help for that, or maybe you have to protest to get funds. That makes sense. Okay, but what about people who seem to be taking an extreme position on something that doesn't make any sense? For example, someone who is picketing pornography places that sell or make pornography, to the point where they're even becoming violent. Maybe they're firebombing places or going after those people. It seems like an extreme reaction. All right, Freud would say that what's probably going on there is this. As a young person, maybe that person was into porno. Maybe they liked it. They were looking at it. That's not that uncommon for young people to look at something like that. But let's say they feel like that's wrong. Maybe someone told them it was wrong. They push it under the surface. But their id isn't going to be that easily satisfied. But as an adult, it's so now threatening to admit that they still like it, that they go overboard in the other way. All right? They can't admit that they like to look at porno. So now they become the crusader to the point where it's extreme. All right, so anytime someone has that extreme reaction, there's a reason. And sometimes maybe it's because they really have feelings like that they can't admit to. That's what he calls reaction formation. Okay. And then the last one that we're going to talk about is the one that he considered healthy. And it's similar to displacement, but in this case, it's a healthy way. Sublimation. Sublimation is expressing the needs of the id in a way that is socially acceptable. All right, for example, the arts are often ways of sublimating. Maybe like Edgar Allan Poe. He wrote a lot of very aggressive, violent things. All right, he couldn't put a real pit and pendulum in his basement, but he could write about it. All right, that's sublimating. Sometimes you talk about it or we think about it in terms of careers. And again, not that I am saying this is correct, but I'm saying how Freud might have looked at it. Someone who maybe becomes a surgeon who can cut people and that might be sublimating a way of dealing with aggressive feelings. Because you don't go around cutting people. Normally you're going to get in trouble and that's not nice, and we learn that that's wrong. But if I do it in a way that's in my job, I can do that. So sublimating is finding a socially acceptable way of expressing what the id wants. If you can find successful ways, this is what lessens anxiety. But the key to all of this psychoanalytics is stuff under the surface. Freud also thought humor was a sort of a defense mechanism, something called a Freudian slip. And again, I had my Freudian slippers, I'd have them on in class. But a Freudian slip is when people say the wrong word. For example, I've done this lots of times. One time in class, I'm talking about Bill Clinton. And I said Bill Clinton's pregnancy instead of Bill Clinton's presidency. That, to Freud, is a Freudian slip. It means something. All right, it's not just a mistake. It means something. Maybe unconsciously I have a thing for Bill Clinton or something. I don't know, but there's something why I said that. So sometimes humor is a way, I mean, we think about black humor, people making jokes about things that maybe most people don't find funny, but it's a way of dealing with the anxiety and dealing with those weird feelings that we have. Carl Jung was, again, another psychoanalytic who talked about other types of parts of our psyche. He believed we also have a collective unconscious, not just our own personal, but a collective one. And this is where things like religions and symbols that are worldwide come into play. He talked about something called synchronicity, no coincidences. For example, let's say that you are sitting here right now, your mind is drifting, we're getting into 20 minutes, longer than I thought, and you're starting to drift away, and all of a sudden someone pops into your mind that you haven't seen for like 5 years. And then all of a sudden later today, you get an email from them. And you think, ooh, that's kind of creepy. Is that a coincidence? Jung would say no, that under the surface, we are psychically connected. And not that you're thinking about them caused them to do it, but somehow you just kind of knew it. That's synchronicity. Those things that seem like coincidences, but they're not. One other idea of Carl Jung's that I just want to throw at you here at the end of this little chat is something called his shadow. He believes we have what he calls the shadow part of our personality. And the shadow is a darker part, a part of ourselves that we probably really don't like. Maybe we don't want to admit it. We shove it down under the surface. We act like it isn't there. Denial, all right? But here's how it comes out. You meet a new person. This happens to all of us. You meet someone and you instantly just don't like them. You just get bad vibes. I don't like that person. It's Mrs. Y. I don't know. It's just, they rub me the wrong way, right? Why? You don't know them. They didn't do anything to you. But why don't you like them? Well, Carl Jung would say that's because unconsciously they remind you of the part of yourself that you don't like. And so that's who you're really reacting to. It really has nothing to do with them. It's a projection. Your unconscious recognizes traits in that person that you don't like about yourself, and so you don't like them. And it's a safer way. Rather than disliking yourself, it's them that you don't like. So it's an interesting way. You know, there's a really cool book right now. I can't think of the author's name, but it's called The Four Agreements, written by a Native American shaman, and he talks about ways to be happier in your life, and one of them is not to take things personally. Someone doesn't like you, someone says mean to you. It's not always about you, and this is kind of the same thing Carl Jung is talking about. Someone's mean to you, it's really not maybe about you. It's maybe them, something about themselves, something that's going on with their lives, and so don't take it personally. So here's the thing with psychoanalysis. Again, none of the things we've talked about here are objectively verifiable through research, observation. It's analytic. That's why it's called that. Does it mean it's all wrong? I don't think so. I think that some of this makes sense. Sometimes it does. We can't prove it, but I do think understanding a little bit about these ideas makes you think about yourself and other people a little bit more. You know, why do people do what they do? Maybe they're not just random acts, but there's something else there. Even if you don't like any of his ideas, that's okay. Because when you look at and you study some of the other ideas, the behaviorists come right from that. They think, no, our personality is just learned through experience, not all this unconscious stuff. Next chat, we'll talk a little bit about the humanists. And the humanists feel like it's not this either. So this is really the start of the other ways of looking at the personality. But it's an important idea in psychology. You can't learn psych without talking about Sigmund, whether you like him or not. He still was influential in at least starting all these conversations. So that's our chat for today. Have a good day, and I will be back with humanism later in the week.